these are the top 7 things that are keeping you slow at 3x3 and how you can fix them. Number 1 is inspection. And this is going to break up into 3 parts that could be holding you back. The first one is how quickly you can plan. How quickly you can plan is important because, in theory, the more you plan, the more options you can consider, and therefore the better your solution will be, meaning that you can plan further into your solve, which gives you a real advantage when you're then going into your F2L. The second one, which hardly anyone talks about, is how many solutions you consider, because the more solutions you consider, the more options you have, the more likely you are to get a good solution. And the third one is pretty self-explanatory, it's just how far you plan. So the further you plan, obviously the more pieces you can see and the more time then you have to track those pieces, and then the further you can track, then you have a real advantage when you're going into the rest of your solve because you already know what's coming, and it allows you to kind of get a real head start when you're going into the rest of your F2L. A good way to increase how quickly you can plan is simply just to try and start your stack mat, so scramble your cube, start your stack mat, and just see how quickly you can plan a cross solution. It doesn't even have to be good, just plan a cross solution really quickly. If you can plan just one cross solution just in 2 seconds or something like that, then that means that you're at a really good start, because that means that you can, in inspection, you can go through 3, maybe even 4 different solutions that you can consider for your cross, which means that you have a higher likelihood of planning a better one. The second one is how far you can plan, and how far you can plan is, in my findings, basically purely dependent on just doing it over and over and over. So you just want to get a cube, just unlimited inspection, so you want to just scramble up your cube, and you want to make sure that you find a good cross, and then you just want to, because you've got an easier cross, it has less moves, which means that it's easier to plan on top of that. So once you're here, then you just want to keep planning, and you can plan for as long as you like here. Just see how many different solutions you can find, how far you can plan. So for here, I've got my first 2 pairs. So then I would close my eyes like that, and then I've got my first 2 pairs solved there. And that's a really good drill to kind of help how far you can plan. And if you do that a bunch, then you'll get a lot. You'll notice immediately that you're planning a lot more in your inspection. And in this drill where you try and plan further, you can actually include the third step, which is how many solutions you consider. Because by doing this, you go through many, many more solutions. And then by doing that, you can kind of find the best ones and then build off of that to see how far you can plan. And that's a really great way to practice 2 things in one time. So you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Not literally. The second thing is solve flow, and solve flow is really, really important. I've only recently realized how important this is to your solving, but it's actually crazy. Once you realize it, it's the difference between a 8-9 second solver and a 5-6 second solver, because they might have the same solution, same finger tricks, they might be able to inspect the same amount even, but then the way that they just kind of know what's coming, and I'll cover this in a second, they just manage to have their solve flow so consistently that their TPS is just all across the solve, rather than having kind of shorter bursts, or even just being able to be consistent with your TPS, but kind of tapering off towards the end of one solution to let you see the next one. And that's really, it's a very small difference, but once you realize it, it's actually one of the things that unlocks a whole new level of speed in your solving. So I've kind of figured out that there's 3 main kind of stages that you can be at in terms of your solve flow. So the first one is finding, which is basically where you're finding your next pieces, so your next pair, after you've solved it. So you're here, going on from my last example, you see this pair, okay, so you solve it like that, and then you just look for your next pair, and also here you're on the last pair, so it's pretty obvious, and then you just solve that, right? So you find one pair, and then you solve it, and then you just find the piece for the next one. You go on like that, which is a great place to start out with, because it helps to drill in those really efficient solutions and make sure that it's a great place to start from, basically. Because if you try and implement look ahead too early, then it's basically just gonna mess you up because you're looking for the wrong stuff. The second one is tracking. So that's basically a fancy way of saying look ahead. You basically want to be able to track then, once you're at this stage, where the pieces are of your next pair while you're solving the current one. So I'll just give you an example here. I would see, for example, this pair right here, this red and green, and then I would start solving that, and then as I'm doing that, I would see that this edge is going here, then I would see that this corner is coming out of this slot, and then I'll be like, okay, and then I solve this pair, right? And that's a good example of tracking. You are at the stage then where you can kind of see where the next pieces are going to be as you're solving the pair. And that brings me on to the third stage, which I call knowing, and this is kind of where every single top solver you look at will be, because knowing where your pieces are unlocks a whole new plane that you might not even be able to think of at this stage, which is basically where, I'll give you an example. I'm here, and I can already see that, so I'm going to solve this pair first, and then I can already see where this pair will be, and I can see where this pair will be. before I've even solved this pair. So then I already know that this case is going to end up with this edge over here, and I already know how this case is going to end up. It's going to have the corner up here, and then the edge here. So here, and then that's pair, and this pair, and then I can already solve that, like that. And then I've already gone to my third pair, and I just knew where it was. So from before I'd even solved my first pair, I already knew what my solve was going to look like up until that last pair. Then on that last pair, you've got 3 pairs worth of time, which is like, unless you're superhuman, like 2 seconds to see where your final pair is going to be. And then you can solve that very quickly, and then you should basically have a pauseless F12 at that stage. And once you reach this stage, it's ridiculously powerful. Like, you'll be able to notice, like, once you get to this stage, it won't be like, oh, I think I can do it. Like, you'll be able to see, like, it's very obvious, because you start to, like, you solve your first pair, okay, that's where my second pair is going to be after I do that. Second pair, okay, that's where my last pair is going to be. Like, you can see it really clearly then, and it's very obvious once you get to that stage. And then there's multiple benefits once you get to that stage, obviously, apart from what I've mentioned. Once you get to that stage of just knowing where your pieces are going to be, you get to be able to choose your pairs differently, because like if you can already see where your next few pairs are going to be, you already know how they're going to end up. You can choose your pairs in advance because you have more time to think about it. You can choose your pairs in advance for the most efficient solution, and you can use it to influence other pairs and really just gives you the best option, right? The third thing is pair choice, and this is something that I've realized only quite recently, within the last month, of how important this actually is. And this ties into the last step in a real way, because if you know where your next pieces are going to be, as I mentioned, you can then choose your pairs a lot more wisely. And for those of you who aren't at that stage yet, maybe you're still tracking or even finding, a great way to practice your pair choice is basically just to solve a pair, and then basically just take yourself back to that finding stage, where then when you're finding the pieces, rather than rushing to try and find the pieces as quickly as you can, try and find the pieces of a pair that will give you the best solution possible, and make sure when you're finding that best pair that you then solve it the best way. So for example here, when I'm here, so I've solved my first pair into the back left, and then I have these 3 pairs. None of them are great, but I'm going to go with this pair for my first one. And that's something that you then need to take a bit of time. So you're here, you don't want to panic and just say, I can see this pair, and then like solve it like that. You want to take your time, and you just want to see, okay, I could solve this one, but that's not a great solution. I could solve this one, that's pretty good. And then if you're at this knowing stage, which you probably won't be if you're doing this drill, because you've probably already had this kind of as an instinct, you'll be able to see like, okay, I'll have a nice pair here or something like that. And then by being able to choose these great pairs, it might seem minuscule at this stage, but like the difference that it actually has is amazing. Like a great example is my solving when I was averaging like maybe 7.2 seconds, and then you look at someone like Yiheng. He's turning, sure, it's a lot faster than mine. His inspection is a lot better than mine, but our solving styles as such are quite similar. But one of the massive differences is that when I try and go on the same scrambles as he does and see what he does, his pair choice is so smart that he knows, like, from his second pair, what his last pair is going to look like. He knows from his first pair what the whole of his F12 is going to look like. And because of that, he just has this amazing ability where then he's on his first pair, and you can see already how he's going to solve his second pair in a slightly inefficient way to give him 2 free pairs for third and fourth pair, which are just amazing capabilities that he has. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that everyone can get to that stage where they just know where it's going to be and they can just choose an amazing solution every time. And being able to choose your pairs and being able to like start to get on that path, even if you're not there. I don't think hardly anyone's there. I mean, like maybe he and a couple of other top cubers, but it's a very small group of people who are at that stage. But if you can start to make some steps towards that by just being able to pause and just choose your pairs, and ideally you wouldn't do this in time solves because it is kind of demotivating them when you're just getting horrible times, but doing it in untimed solves where you just got a cube there, you're in a car or whatever, and you just solve and you just kind of think, okay, I've got this pair, this is a good solution, alright, this pair's actually better, I'll go and solve this pair, and this is how I'm going to solve it, right? That sort of thing. And that is a great thing that then allows you to kind of hone in your pair choice skills. And now the fourth thing is bad solutions. And now this is, it mostly applies to solvers who are like under 12 seconds or so, but there are also some of you who are like maybe a bit faster, like maybe even sub 10, who this still kind of applies to in some scenarios. Probably not all scenarios, but there are some cases where it might happen. I imagine most of you would know how to solve a pair like this pretty efficiently. And the thing is, you probably do, right? But it's not those pairs that a lot of people have bad solutions on. Most cases where people have bad solutions, it's in the tougher cases. The cases that are more like this. The easiest way I find to do this, and I haven't done this for a while, which is mainly just because I'm now at the speed where I know the right solutions to most cases, is just simply to go to like a F2L sheet. I know JPerm has one, and I just printed this out when I was at this stage. I just printed out the list of every single F2L case you can get, and I just went through pair by pair, looked at my solution, and then looked at the solution that he recommends for that case. It might be a bit outdated now, I'm not entirely sure. I might be able to make one of these myself, but like, just kind of look at what the top solvers are doing for that sort of pair, and you just kind of go through one by one and see how your solution stacks up. And if you're doing something very similar, then you're probably solving that pair right and you don't need to worry about it. But if there are some pairs, especially the harder ones, where you're solving it inefficiently, then it's definitely worth going and changing that, because that will have a big impact when you get that case. Now, the fifth thing is you're probably rotating too much. And you might think that you're not rotating a ton at all, but if you break down your solves and you see how much you're really rotating, it'll actually come to light that you probably are rotating more than you think and more than you like. And there's a few main things that could be causing you to rotate and then therefore slowing you down. First one is you're rotating to use RU moves instead of using like LU moves or just hedging in a pair. So for example, if you're in a case like this, you might actually have the instinct to just do a Y2 and solve this. But in fact, here, you may as well just solve it like that. And I'll put a timer on the screen there. It actually stacks up way faster, just to be able to solve that pair in the back with the LU moves. Or for example, if you're in a situation like this, you might rotate here and do that, which you might think is fine, and I actually have for quite a while, but I recently figured out, especially from watching solves from people like Yiheng, is that it's actually great here just to do a hedge. And that actually is so much faster. Like, doing this compared to doing this is so much faster. Second thing is you might be rotating to find pieces unnecessarily. And you'll probably be doing this more than you think. You might not do it at all, and that's great, but there are a lot of people who do this, and they don't even realize it. So basically, you're here, you're probably at the finding stage if this is happening to you, and you're like, okay, pieces here, and then you do this, which isn't a good solution, by the way. And then here you're like, and then you solve this. And that's only just a small rotation, it's just like that. But that time, I mean, just doing the solution straight away compared to doing that first is a pretty big difference. Like when you're trying to get to like a sub 10, sub 8 level, that is something that you need to cut out from your solves. So then here you're like, and then you solve this, here. And then in some situations, I've even seen people here not know what to do and then do a Y2 and solve that with R moves, which then ties into the first point. So you really want to be careful with that sort of stuff. Third thing is rotating in your pair solutions unnecessarily, and this is way more common than I'd like to see. And this is especially common in combination with the first one, where someone sees the pair and then they rotate in their solution unnecessarily just to be able to solve it with RU moves rather than doing LU moves. And that's a big thing that you really need to fix, because if you're rotating unnecessarily simply to do a different move set, that A means it's very obvious that then your LU turning simply isn't good enough, and it also means that you didn't find the pieces quickly enough and you didn't think through it enough to realize that I actually don't need to rotate here. And this is also common with cases, for example, like this, where you might be here, and for this case, it's good to rotate, but there is actually a solution that it doesn't require rotation, which is to pair it up here. Then rather than rotating like this, you can solve it into the back like that. There's probably some of you who do that, but I used to do that, but then I actually stopped doing it because I thought, oh, there's no point in doing like that insert. Like, I didn't really like it, but I've recently realized that not rotating is actually quite a big deal, especially if it's in a situation where it's still like going to give you an OLL that isn't like horrible. Like, you're not doing that insert and then gives you a dot OLL or something like that. And there are even situations where you do that insert and then you get a full cross on top, which is then obviously an advantage to it as well. In summary, basically just only rotate when it's appropriate, and if you take some time to look at your pairs, you should be able to tell by yourself when it's appropriate to rotate. Sixth thing is turning, and this is basically all finger tricks, because that's basically what turning is. I'm going to kind of break this up into two different sections. One's going to be accuracy, like your turning accuracy, and the other one's going to be your regrips that you have in your solutions. So the first one is accuracy, and I learned this from Jane McNeil. Shout out Jay, he's awesome. You can turn, like, you might just be thinking, oh yeah, I'm doing like flick U. It's like, that's great, right? But then there's actually kind of two different ways of executing a flick U. You've either got like a solution like this, where you're kind of bending at your finger like this, and you're kind of bending like that, or you hit it with the tip of your finger like this, like that. And obviously it's not like that, but like this, right? And you'll notice here, me doing this and me doing this. The second one's a lot more accurate, and it creates a much more kind of controlled turning style, which is what you want. You want it to be controlled but fast, and that's what this allows you to do. So definitely keep this in mind. You don't want to be turning like this, and this doesn't even only apply to U moves. It applies to D moves as well when you're here. It applies to F moves like this. You don't want to bend back like that. You want to kind of go like this. And this doesn't only apply to U moves like this. It applies to D moves as well. In some cases it applies to like B moves. Like I see some people do it like this. Like, don't know if I can do it, but like they bend back like that. Versus just pushing with like the nail like that. And they're just small things, but they actually make quite a big difference, because the accuracy of your turning ultimately determines how many lockups you're going to have. And lockups, as I'm sure you know, can add a lot of time to your solve, which shouldn't even be there, right? Another thing that I've recently figured out in terms of like kind of avoiding lockups is basically when you're doing like an RU set, like so you're doing an R move and then you want to do a U move, or same for LU, you don't want to try and corner cut that when your thumb's coming up here, because then your thumb gets in the way. So if you're here, then you start to try and do a U, your thumb gets in the way of the layer, especially if it's like kind of, you're holding it like this. You have like a massive lockup here then. And that adds a lot of time, and I've kind of trying to get myself out of that habit where I kind of just keep my thumb in close, trying to move my thumbs further out, because that happens to me more than I'd like, where I'm up here and then I lock up because I'm trying to corner cut that turn there. So try and make your turns accurate, and try and do your full, so try and like complete the turn before you do your next one. Try not to corner cut much, because if you think about it, like the solvers in like Min Tai in 1982, he didn't have corner cutting on his cube. He had to turn accurately, right? So I used to do this. I don't know if it actually works, but another thing that you could even try if you wanted to is just to use a cube that's either intentionally tight or just a cube that isn't very forgiving in terms of your turning, just to kind of get yourself used to having to turn accurately, and then try and carry that over. Also, you can do that, or you can just try and make sure that you're completing your turns fully before you do your next one, like that, or just keeping it in mind and trying not to turn like this and things like that. The second thing is your regrips. So I'm sure you know this, don't want to regrip everywhere, and I'm sure most of you don't, but there are still some situations, like for example, who I mentioned before, start to do an RU trigger, and you would regrip down like this, and that might not seem like a lot of time, right? It's very fast, but if you think about it, that adds up. And then if you compare this to that, the time that it takes to regrip adds on to that solution, and it's not even that much faster to like regrip and do that solution with the grip on the bottom, right? So you definitely want to try and avoid stuff, especially when you're doing like RU, R prime, stuff like that, LU, like stuff like that, and try and just pinch the U moves here, like that, rather than like doing a move like that. And the pinching moves, also it's the same as what I mentioned in the accuracy stuff. You don't want to be going like this. You want to just do it like that, and then you can do that really fast. And the last one, number 7, is bad algs. And I know most of you won't have this, but there are some, and I know with one person watching, I'm looking at you, you know who you are, who has this. And it's a small thing, and you might think, oh, it's only like half a second or whatever. But half a second, when you're trying to get sub 10, you're averaging 10.5. Dropping that half a second by switching that one alg might mean that you're on the last solve, you're an average of 100, and like your session means like 10 flat, and you need to get like a 9.8, and you get a 10.3 if you use the bad alg. You save half a second by doing the good alg, you get a 9.8, you get your sub 10 average of 100. And that's like a bit, it's a silly example, but like it does make a difference, and you definitely want to avoid the bad algs. You want to go for the algs that you can execute as fast as possible, are the most reliable, and are the most comfortable to execute. And that's basically, that applies to any alg, ZB, OLO, PLO, F2O, heck, even crossed algs. You want to make sure that you're doing every alg the best it can be, and you don't want to be lazy about when you're picking these, because it is something that's going to be ingrained in your memory and you're going to do over and over and over and over, and you really want to make sure that you're doing those good algs to save the time when it applies, when it happens in a situation that matters, and you'll be grateful that you did it. Okay, so the easiest way to A, like, know if you're using bad algs, and B, to fix it, is to go again to like a website like AlgDB or something that has like a massive list of algs, and go through the OLs, go through the PLLs one by one, and just look at your alg and then look at the top alg on there. And the top alg is the most voted alg, and the most voted alg generally in most cases means it's the best one. So try and go for the top alg, compare it to your alg. If you're using a bad one, then you'll be able to see it pretty quickly. And then I would recommend you switch to that new one, because, as I just mentioned, it might seem small, but it is very important. And you might be thinking, like, this is a lot of effort to go through one by one through, like, what, 78 algs, and seeing for every single alg if your alg matches. And yeah, it's, I mean, guess what? Being a world-class cube is hard. No one ever said it's easy. So you got to put in the hard work if you want to get the results. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you liked it, and hopefully you guys like this, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.